Welcome into the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. Got a very interesting show for you today, folks. One that I'm excited to bring to you today. I've had kind of a weird couple of weeks. I'm not going to lie. Had a lot of death in my family the last couple of weeks, so this is going to be a very interesting show today. We're going to explore the afterlife, but not the afterlife in the way that you would expect. Not the Christian afterlife. Not the afterlife you're used to. Not the tunnel of light, not the relatives waiting on the other side, not the flowery afterlife, not Jesus waiting on the other side for you. And as a matter of fact, it's not even going to occur during the time of Jesus. We're going to totally blow your mind with this. We're going to go to a time before Jesus. We're going to go to ancient civilizations. We're going to learn about what it was that ancient civilizations believed in before the time of Jesus. This topic absolutely fascinates me. There's a book out there right now by Dr. Gregory Shushan. It's called Near-Death Experiences in Ancient Civilizations, The Origins of the World's Afterlife Beliefs. And the book is riveting, folks. It delves into the beliefs of Old and Middle Kingdom Egypt, Sumer and Old Babylonian Mesopotamia, Vedic India, pre-Buddhist China, and Maya and Aztec Mesoamerica. The stories will blow you away. It's more than just stories. It's documentation, really, of what's going on in these different kingdoms. Let's bring in Dr. Shushan, and let's talk a little bit about it. I'll tell you first about our guest, and we'll bring him in. Dr. Gregory Shushan is the leading authority on near-death experiences and afterlife beliefs across cultures and throughout history. He's an award-winning author affiliated with Birmingham Newman University, University of Winchester, Marian University, and the Parapsychology Foundation. A former researcher at the University of Oxford and University of Wales. He now resides in San Francisco. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome in to the first time to Darkness Radio, Dr. Gregory Shushan. Dr. Shushan, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me on, Tim. I appreciate it.
This topic, Dr. Shushan, is so fascinating. Mainly because, it's not tunnel of light. It's not relatives waiting on the other side. It's not sweetness and light. It's not, it's not good tidings. And I came back to my body and I feel love and overwhelming light. And, I want to go out and change the world now. This is some kind of dark stuff, isn't it?
It's a mix. I would say it is all those things and more, depending on the culture and the individual who's having the near-death experience or who's writing about them in terms of their afterlife beliefs. So you mentioned the tunnel. It's a great example. In the kind of our typical Western stereotype of what a near-death experience is, everybody rushes through the dark tunnel and there's a light at the end, and then they come out in this, amazing heavenly realm, and there's the being of light, Jesus or Muhammad or the Buddha, whoever you happen to see at the other end. But in a lot of cultures, there is no tunnel. And then sometimes they're not even rushing through darkness. It's just people will end up in the other world. Sometimes there's some examples from Polynesia and Native American examples where people describe walking along a road to the other world. And they even say, I saw my footprints, or I saw the footprints in the sand of the people who had gone to the spirit village before me. One woman even talked about how she saw another spirit walking down the path in the opposite direction, and that was somebody who was having a near-death experience and was on their way back to the body. So the kind of takeaway really of all this is that, yes, near-death experiences, it's a genuine phenomenon. It happens spontaneously to people, regardless of your beliefs, regardless of your culture. But even though there are some similarities, they are expressed in very different cultural ways. And then there are also some just flat out differences.
Now, you just said something very interesting in that, in our contained singular experience here in a somewhat Christian society, I'll say Christian society and keep it contained to that. We have a singular experience. We go through that tunnel. We have our experience. We see our relatives. We see the light. We might even have a bit of a review, or maybe we see something on the other side. Maybe we break that plane, we get to that other side, but then we're swooped back into our body. We don't pass somebody on the way back. You're saying that you know, and we'll get into some of the stories too here during the program in different cultures. But you're saying that they meet others on the other side.
Yeah, there are a few Western examples of this where people will meet somebody they didn't know had died in the afterlife, and then they come back and it's confirmed that that person had died. So if I had an NDE and I happen to see my Uncle Bill there, and I come back to life, and my mom says, "By the way, Uncle Bill died while you were in your coma." So that kind of thing. Happens. And there's some Western accounts. They're rare. They're rare in all cultures, but they are tested in different places around the world, including going back, to ancient China and various kinds of um, cross-cultural near-death experience accounts.
I find, going from one culture to another, and especially in these ancient times, that some of the building blocks of what we believe now are set up in some of these stories. Things like reincarnation are
Mhm.
set up in some of these stories, but they're set up in kind of abstract ways. Like the in the story, so lies the mechanism. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So, can you give us a good example of where reincarnation lies in one of these tales?
Sure. So all the civilizations that you mentioned that I looked at, the one that's most relevant to that would be Vedic India. But in the earliest, this is the kind of pre-Hindu tradition, the foundation for all the Hindu religions that would come later. Um, and in the earliest periods with the Rig Veda, the Atharva Veda, the Brahmanas, these pretty early texts starting at least 1500 BCE, possibly much earlier in oral traditions. There's not really a lot of reincarnation in these texts. There are some references to rebirth here and there, but we're not sure if it's spiritual rebirth or symbolic ritual rebirth or what exactly. There seems to be a few hints here and there. So in these earlier texts, there's more focus on these stories of people dying temporarily, coming back to life and talking about their experiences in the other world, which is basically a near-death experience. They're often in mythological form. But then as time goes on and reincarnation becomes more introduced into the society, then those types of accounts of NDEs kind of wane. They die off a little bit. And then there's more focus on the kind of intermediate state of the afterlife. What's going to happen while your consciousness is outside the body before it's going to be reborn in the next life. And this is interesting because it's mirrored in, you probably are familiar with the cases of children who remember past lives
Yeah.
in different culture, research by Ian Stevenson and Jim Tucker and Jim Matlock, people like that. In a minority of those accounts, but a pretty significant minority, there's quite a lot of them, there are these children who remember not just their previous personality, they remember the death of that personality, including the soul leaving the body, traveling to another world, meeting a being of light, all these elements that are familiar from near-death experiences. So it's essentially the same as an NDE, but instead of going back to their old body, they're being reborn in a new body. So there's this kind of parallel idea that there's this um, spiritual state between lives that people pass through, and that kind of gets introduced in the Indian texts, the Vedic texts, as the near-death experience accounts kind of die off.
Very interesting. I want to talk as we start to get into the program here. I want to talk a little bit about Egypt. It seems like a lot of us have this fascination with ancient Egypt and some of the beliefs there, but we have kind of a very base or cursory understanding of what it was that Egyptians believed in. What is it exactly that they believed in when it came to the near death experience? And what was it that they thought happened when they had an experience with near death? Not necessarily transforming to the other side, but what happened when they came close and came back?
Um, that's a trickier question than you might think. So out of all the civilizations that I looked at, there were either accounts of near-death experience or medical magical texts that hint at near-death experience that talk about the soul going to the other world and ways to retrieve it and the experiences they might have there. The only exception to this was Egypt, which is surprising when you think how preoccupied Egyptian civilization was with death and the afterlife. And yet we have no accounts of near-death experience. It's not until much later in Egyptian civilization that we even have stories about people who travel to the other world and return. And there are very obviously literary tales. There's stories like a magician goes there, probably in his body, and has all these adventures. Very much plots rather than like an NDE. So the reason for this is because the earliest stages of Egyptian civilization, and by that I mean 2,500 years,
Mhm.
they basically didn't have a context for writing personal narrative. So nobody would have sat down and said, "Oh, dear diary, this is what happened to me today," or "I'm going to write an article about my NDE for the Pharaonic Times," or this kind of thing just didn't exist. Writing was exclusively for the priestly class, the royal class. It was used for ritual, for pyramids, um, and also for bureaucracy. So we have like documents about sales of beer, grains that are allotted to workers, divorce decrees. So from our perspective, it's interesting because literacy was so limited to such a sort of small level of society. So they just didn't see it as functional in these different ways. So basically, what I had to do with Egypt is look at the descriptions of the afterlife beliefs themselves and kind of figure out to what degree are they similar to near-death experiences, and how far can I take an argument that, if they are really similar, could they have been based on the NDEs?
Hmm.
And I did the same with all the civilizations. I looked at their beliefs as well as, any accounts of experiences. Um, and so I found that yes, the soul leaves the body, it enters darkness, it comes out into a realm of light, it meets a being of light. There's like a evaluation, judgment of their earthly life, transformational experiences. There's even an encounter with the soul's own corpse in a kind of symbolic way because the um, the soul is associated with all these different divinities. It's basically one and the same as the sun god Re and the god of knowledge and all these different transcendent kind of deities. So there's a focus on the death on the god of the afterlife, Osiris, who the soul of the dead encounters in the underworld. And the text basically says, this is an encounter with yourself. This is your own being, this rotting corpse in the underworld. So I saw that as a symbolic out-of-body experience perception of the person's own body. And the being of light is the sun god Re. So everything is there, but it's in Egyptian cultural symbolic sort of terms.
So, so to you, what is the lesson learned by you uh, kind of, I guess, confronting your own corpse, for lack of a better term? So you're faced with your own mortality.
Yeah.
You see that there eventually is an end to this life, but yet you're getting a reprieve. What does that mean to you?
What I think it means, and this is kind of consistent with NDEs, what people who have NDEs tell us, and with the ancient texts, is it's the moment of realization that you're dead and yet you're still conscious, you're still alive, you're still able to see this thing that used to be you or that you associated with you, but now you just see it as this thing, this material, cold, dead thing. Um, and
Hmm.
in lots of NDEs, contemporary ones, I can think of lots of examples from Polynesia, Native America. They, the person who's describing the NDE literally says, I saw that thing there and I did not want to get back into it. So it's this transcendent state where you no longer even identify with that person that you once were. You're fully in this, disembodied, spiritualized state. And it's the same in the ancient texts when there's these encounters with the corpses. It's not just in Egypt. There's a couple of other examples where this confrontation with your own corpse is the thing that, or in some cases, the corpse of a god, which has the double meaning because it's associating you with a divine state, but also reinforcing that you're no longer in the physical form. But it's always the thing that leads to the realization that you've transcended your own death, and it's the thing that enables you to pass into the next stage of the afterlife. That realization is kind of what's required to continue in the next stage of your afterlife journey.
Wow. I to be repulsed by your own body. I mean, I get the fact that you see it as a container, not only that, but a rotting container or a container that maybe is past its expiration date, that you think to yourself, you know what, maybe it's time to move on. But, I think to myself, and Dr. Shushan, I say that, every day I wake up and I say to myself, you know what, I really am I'm at this point in my life where I'm in love with the journey, right? I'm in love with everything I do. And it's not a materialistic thing. It's
Hmm.
just I'm having fun with life right now. I'm just
Right.
really having fun with life. I'm in love with everything right now.
Hmm.
And it's just I haven't been that way with my life always,
Mm.
right? I think we go through stages in our life,
Yeah.
right? And it's just an appreciation of life.
Hmm.
So to be in that mindset, I mean, you really would have to be evolved in a spiritual way to say, you know what? Yeah, I think I'm over it. I think it's time to just really move on,
Yeah.
to not want to have to hold on to that last bit of physicality, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's I mean, you're truly done with the journey on earth if you think, yeah, it's a container, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm ready to move to the next stage.
Right. Right. And there, in some of these accounts, I'm thinking of there's a 19th century Hawaiian NDE account of a woman named Kalima who was especially adamant about not wanting to return to her body, to the point that during her NDE, she was chased by the spirits um, back to her body. I mean, obviously, whether the degree to which that actually happened or the degree to which it was her own, subconscious creating this kind of plot around her not wanting to return. It's impossible to say. But basically, the spirits in the other world who a few minutes earlier had been friendly and joyous at her arrival were now told by the gods of the afterworld it's not her time to die. She needs to go back to the body, and she resisted. So they chased her back, and when she got back to the place where her body was lying dead, she was basically just saying, "I don't want to get back into that thing. Why can't I stay in that other world where everything was so beautiful? I felt so happy. It was so joyful. I didn't have a care in the world. And now you're going to make me go back into that." And they literally had to push her back into the body, as the text describes. And then the woman who reported it said she never ceased to regret having to go back to her body for the rest of her life.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So,
Well,
yeah,
that kind of lines up with some people who have had NDEs who say, it was so beautiful over there and I can't wait to go back. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, that's a extremely common thing. I don't want to say universal, but it's almost
Yeah.
universal. But
Yeah. It,
yeah, nobody comes back, or hardly anybody comes back and says, that's a much worse place than here. I'm really glad to be back. And most people, they no longer have a fear of death. Um, all, whatever kind of um, I don't know, frightening, fearful teachings they grew up with in their religion are vanished because they've now had direct experience of what the afterlife is like, direct experience of the divine. So it kind of helps them to have a new life once they come back. They come back transformed for the better most of the time.
yeah. So how do things differ from Egypt to Sumer and old Babylonia and Mesopotamia? Is it one of those things where is it a difference in gods or transference of gods? Is it beliefs? How does the NDE differ? Is it the gods are more ruthless or the experiences?
No, I wouldn't say that. So in Egypt, part of the journey of the soul is the main fear in Egypt for the soul was not like burning in hell forever. It was annihilation. It was non-existence. So the perils that the soul goes through are very culturally Egyptian things that reflect the environment. So there's a snake that spits fire. There's apes that will cut off your head. Um, various kinds of what I see as symbolic dangers of and symbolizing annihilation, symbolizing that your soul is not going to survive this journey. Um, Mesopotamia is a little different. We actually have from ancient Sumer what's possibly the world's first near-death experience, an actual documentary account. You might have heard of the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's the main
Mhm.
Mesopotamian epic myth. There's an earlier version called, well, it didn't actually have a name, the whole epic, but one section of it, scholars refer to as the death of Bilgamesh. Bilgamesh was the actual Sumerian king who became Gilgamesh in the Babylonian period. So this is going back to 1800 BCE, something like that. And this text, which didn't make the final cut into the Epic of Gilgamesh, describes how he's lying there on his deathbed. His soul leaves his body and it goes to this other world, and he meets Utu, the sun god, a being of light, obviously. He meets other kinds of judges, deity judges who are also radiating light, and they kind of review the the different deeds that he had done and whether or not uh, they were satisfactory. Whether he maintained the temples and public works and did the correct rituals and things like this. And then once they kind of positively evaluate it, they decide that he's going to have, a pretty good afterlife fate. He's going to become a judge among them in the other world. He's still half human, but he's going to be among the judges, which is, it's a pretty top-notch job in the other world. And he also meets his relatives. There's a banquet thrown in his honor, and then he goes back to his body, and he's able to like prepare his funeral and his tomb in readiness for his actual death. So, but so within that, we've got this apparent actual NDE account because he's a historical figure. It doesn't involve like some story or some plot. Just in contrast, there's a Sumerian myth about the goddess Inanna called the death of Inanna. She travels to the underworld deliberately, possibly in her body. There's no out-of-body experience. She goes there to like overthrow the queen of the underworld from her throne, and there's all these story kind of aspects to it.
Yeah.
Whereas the Bilgamesh text is just basically reads like an NDE, but from a Sumerian perspective. So, and all those elements basically are also in the Egyptian afterlife beliefs. It's just that we've got the sun god is Re, and the deities have different names. And actually, in the Sumerian myth, there's not as they don't have the afterlife perils so much as the Egyptian afterlife beliefs. But in their beliefs, they do. They have, you know, although there it's more of a case of living in this kind of shadowy, depressing half-life, this kind of hazy realm where nothing happens and you're just kind of wandering around half alive. That seems to be more of the Sumerian fear rather than total non-existence.
What that would be incredibly frightening to be
Yeah,
half dead and walking around, or half alive, one or the other.
yeah.
Um, you bring up interesting fact about that goes across all of these different cultures, and that's this: that there are stories, it seems like, in each one where they are either having the NDE or they're entering the underworld fully alive
Hmm.
and having experiences with gods or trying to defeat gods, which is
Right.
an interesting deal in that. And I tell you what, Dr. Shushan, let's take our break here. When we come back, there's one interesting story, and I'm wondering if you can recall it for us. I think it's from Aztec Mesoamerica, where it's two brothers that try to defeat the gods in the name of their father.
Right.
Which we'll talk about that in the second half of the program.
Okay.
Extremely interesting deal in which I believe they're trying to get rid of human sacrifice.
Mhm.
It's a fascinating story. I got hooked on that story for some reason or another. But
It's a great one. Yeah.
yeah, that one gripped me. That one was an interesting story. But uh, lots of great stories in this book, folks. I highly encourage you to get it. We have a link in the description of this program so you can get the book, Near Death Experience in Ancient Civilizations, The Origins of the World's Afterlife Beliefs. It's written by our guest, Dr. Gregory Shushan. It's got a foreword by John Tate as well. Folks, during the break, get a copy of it. When we come back, we'll talk about Vedic India. We'll talk about pre-Buddhist China. Believe it or not, I think by the way, Dr. Shushan, I got an image when reading about pre-Buddhist China of of a Mountain Dew commercial based on a couple of words of yours about someone riding on a dragon and the word "dew" in there. So I got the, of course, I got the Mountain Dew commercial in my head when I read it because I'm stupid. That's all there is to it. But we'll talk about Vedic India, pre-Buddhist China, and Maya and Aztec Mesoamerica when we come back with Dr. Gregory Shushan. You're watching and listening to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Tim Dennis. My guest is Dr. Gregory Shushan. The name of the book, Near-Death Experience in Ancient Civilizations, The Origins of the World's Afterlife Beliefs. And we have a link to it in the description of this program. I highly encourage you to go get this book. Gosh, it's an interesting book, a very interesting book. You put together a great book. If you're watching on video, it's in the background, right behind Dr. Shushan right there. And it's got tales from Old and Middle Kingdom Egypt, Sumer, and Old Babylonian Mesopotamia, Vedic India, pre-Buddhist China, and Maya and Aztec Mesoamerica. Now, we talked a little bit about Vedic India, but from India, we're dealing, is that where mainly where the Buddhist part of this is coming in? Is that where, or is it more, what are we getting from the what NDE are we getting from there, or what system are we getting from there, other than reincarnation?
Yeah, I actually should have clarified earlier. So my reasons for selecting these particular ancient civilizations is that they didn't have a lot of cultural influence on each other. So I wanted it to be this idea that, maybe the Egyptians came up with this story and then the rest of the world learned it from them. I wanted to make sure that that wasn't an
Oh, okay.
explanation that was
Okay.
possible. So that's why I'm looking at I looked at pre-Buddhist China because Buddhism originated in India, like you said.
Right.
So if there were NDEs and afterlife beliefs in China that were similar to India, people could say, "Oh, that's because Buddhism went there." So I was trying to look at the era before Buddhism in China and before even like what we know of as Hinduism in India. So yeah, this kind of pre-Hindu, what they call Vedic culture.
Okay.
Um, and from there, we've got, in the Rig Veda, which is the earliest of any of these ancient texts from India, we do have indications of near-death experience. There are tales of people who go to the other world and return. But they involve gods, and actually, there's one of a horse. There's the near-death experience of a horse that's described in pretty similar terms as a human near-death experience. But the Rig Veda was a ritual text, and it was kind of to be recited by priests. And in fact, it was memorized by priests. It wasn't even written down for hundreds of years. And to this day, priests have this entire massive, I mean, the translation is three huge hardback volumes, and they have it memorized verbatim. If you have a priest in India recite the Rig Veda to you, and you go back and look at the most ancient, actual text, physical text, it will be exactly the same.
Really?
So, which is amazing to my mind. I'm
Oh yeah.
terrible at memorizing things.
Oh yeah. No,
Um,
I couldn't do it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Now, now,
there
doctor,
seems to
you can't just leave reincarnate or not. I'm sorry, you can't just leave NDE of a horse out there and not describe what the story is behind the NDE of a horse.
um, yeah, I mean, it's basically again in this kind of ritual context, and it's focused on obviously the journey of the soul of the person that the ritual is for. And the ritual is to ensure that they're going to have, ease their way into the other world and that they're going to have a possible afterlife. And so to accompany the soul of the dead is going to be your favorite horse, basically. So, and to kind of demonstrate how that works, then they describe the NDE of the horse in similar terms as to how it would be as a human, just to kind of reinforce the fact that, you're not going to be alone. Your horse is going to be going with you. I think that's the meaning of that. Um, but it's also this particular text. A lot of these ancient texts actually they were deliberately esoteric, deliberately obscure because they didn't want people, the common person to be able to understand them. They wanted to keep it to this kind of priestly elite sort of level. So I mean, their definition of occult texts really.
Well, I suppose to have a little bit of mystery, again, a cult text or a little bit of mystery behind it. I mean, means that, you do truly find out in the end what happens. I mean, it's your own experience too, right? So
Exactly.
when you
Yeah.
get there, you have your own experience.
Yeah.
But then again, okay, I'll flip it back on you. Why does it have to be so mysterious? Why not map out everything? Why not say literally from beginning to end, this is what happened, and give people a roadmap, or give the elite a roadmap of what happened from beginning to end in that particular experience?
I think it's that. I think it's that the elite have the roadmap, but they want to keep it for themselves. They don't want to make it accessible to everybody. And I mean, it's the same with that's what the Egyptian pyramid texts and coffin texts and books of the dead are. They're basically roadmaps, guidebooks to the other world, and describing to the soul of the dead how to negotiate the other world through the priests. It's always has to be mediated by the priests. But what's interesting in India, Egypt, China, um, and elsewhere, I'd have to think about it. But in most of these civilizations, as time goes on and these texts become more and more available to the general population, either because literacy is increasing or because physically, papyrus becomes available in Egypt, and instead of the afterlife being only for kings, where the pyramid texts are carved in the pyramids only, then they become carved in or painted on coffins, and then that's the elite, the general elite gets them, and then gradually on papyrus or even a potsherd, and then everybody can have it. And so as this happens, as the afterlife becomes more democratized or more accessible to everybody, there's an interesting change in the descriptions, and that change is that there are more threats of hells and punishments, more of these, decapitations by apes and snakes spitting fire and things like that. In China, we have descriptions of, the punishments fit the crime, basically. So people who gossip will have a hot iron rod shoved through their tongue. People who, strike their parents have their arms lopped off. So really kind of graphic, gory punishments that fit the transgressions you did on earth. And at the same time, then the heavenly realm also gets more kind of systematized and described, things are described more in a binary kind of way. If you're good, you go here. If you're bad, you go here. And to me, it's obviously seems to be that the afterlife was starting to be used as a tool of control of the general populace to basically threaten people to behave better, or they're going to have these punishments in the other world. And if they behave better, then they're going to have reward in the other world. And obviously, this is familiar with pretty much every religion, uh, at least the monotheistic Abrahamic religions of Christianity, Judaism, Islam.
So that
So,
starts to answer what my next question was going to be. Obviously, if the elites are having this afterlife experience, was it available to the general populace? Was it something that wasn't held over their heads? Like, uh, to give an example, such as Christianity, Christ died for our sins, so therefore the kingdom of heaven is open to all.
mhm.
Giving that example, was it a thing where the elite are open to other deities, but the common folk weren't? Was it something to that effect, or was there a caste system in most of these societies, or was it open to all, that they could get fire spit in their face by snakes, or was it something where that was only open to elites?
Yeah, I think there was an attempt to reserve it for the elites. I don't think it was a very successful attempt, especially when you think that near-death experience happened to anybody. It's not based on your class. So that might be one of the reasons why afterlife beliefs kind of became more accessible to the general populace. And also, if people gradually had a little more leisure time to think about these things, if you're not working 12 hours a day, cutting blocks to build a pyramid or whatever, um, or if you're one of the artisans building a pyramid and you're the person responsible for making the paintings and the inscriptions, you might start, learning about what they mean and applying it to yourself. And that's kind of exactly what happened, at least in New Kingdom Egypt.
Hmm.
Um, but Christianity is interesting because um, there's a lot of gatekeeping going on about the afterlife in Christianity. I've always wondered, for a religion that's based, you know, predicated basically on the death and return of Jesus, why don't we hear about very much about what happened to him during the time he was dead and before he came back, which would have been a near-death experience.
Right.
So NDEs are not really a big thing in Christianity, and I think that's kind of a result of um, there's no direct access to the divine. It's mediated through the church and it's mediated through Jesus. You can't get, if you die, um, your actions are going to determine whether you go to heaven or hell, and that's all because of the system that the church has set up, essentially.
Mhm.
So therefore I think NDEs were sort of seen as a threat to the church, and maybe um, just it's a little bit of speculation here, but going back to the Council of Nicaea, there's an actual text called the Gospel of Nicodemus. It's an apocryphal text that was deleted from the Bible, and that does have describes Jesus's descent to the underworld, where he frees the sinners and things like that. So I think that might have been cut out because it showed a direct access to the divine through near-death experiences, and that's something that was, anathema to the Catholic Church.
Oh, I think you're right. I think you're 100% right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it does muddy the water a little bit. Yeah.
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 And in contrast, Mormons, they love near-death experiences. I mean, it's really kind of because their whole thing is that the miracles in the biblical era, thousands of years ago, they're not just confined to them because, of course, their prophets had near-death experience and visionary experiences. So they want to be able to say these experiences are still going on.
Mhm.
People are still having NDEs today. And our founders in the 19th century still had these kind of experiences. Because originally, when Mormonism came out, they were criticized for claiming these kinds of miracles. And so they wanted to kind of validate that they
Yeah.
still actually occur.
Yeah. And you're right. To this day, they're still occurring. So yeah,
Yeah,
the evidence continues to compile. So
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. Uh, Pre-Buddhist China. What's interesting, like I said before the break, as I'm reading about it, I'm thinking, boy, their near-death experiences sound like a Mountain Dew commercial. This is great. People riding on dragons and people having a good old time. It seemed to me like it was great, but then I get a little bit further into the chapter and I'm like, I don't know that that's so great. Tell us a little bit about some of the interesting stories of pre-Buddhist China and the different experiences they were having and as far as near-death experiences went.
Yeah. That was a tricky chapter to do, really, because we see China as a culture, whereas it's actually northern and southern China were pretty different cultures. Very different texts came out from each region, and there were lots of changes over time. So I tried to do it sort of chronologically, but it was a difficult thing to grasp. And so the ones that you mentioned, riding on dragons and have these kind of omnipresent celestial experiences going through rivers and behind the sun. And there's like an undersea realm. I mean, really kind of psychedelic experiences, really, for
Yeah.
lack of a better word. Um, a lot of these seem to be from shamanism, from shamanic journeys to the other world, and seem to be descriptions of shamanic experiences of the afterlife, which was kind of a parallel path to descriptions of the afterlife from near-death experiences. Um, but one of the absolute earliest texts from China, it's about 750 or 800 BCE, and that seems to be an actual documentary account of an NDE. There's everything is documented in full because it's a very bureaucratic sort of society, and they wanted to make sure that this account was taken seriously. And so it describes how there's a particular sort of local governor type ruler named Qian Si, and he's lying on his deathbed with some kind of illness. He has a fever, and his soul travels to the other world, and he has, basically a near-death experience with a lot of the elements that would be familiar to us to this day. But then some very unique kind of idiosyncratic elements to it. For example, a couple of bears appear, and he's with the Emperor of Heaven in the other world. That's the being of light or the deity figure he calls the Emperor of Heaven. And these bears attack the Emperor. And so Qian Si intervenes and kills the bears and saves the Emperor's life. And so in exchange for this, the Emperor grants him, you know, good favor when he goes back to Earth, and gives his sons good things, and basically says, you need to go back to Earth. You have to return to life, but it's going to be a positive thing, and this is what's going to happen. He gives them some prophecies about political events that are coming. And so Kian sees, he says, okay, I'll go back to my body. But before he goes, and this is the kind of key evidential element and goes back to what we were talking about earlier of seeing other people in the other world. Um, he sees standing next to the Emperor of Heaven a little boy. So fast forward 10 or 20 years later, Kinsey went back to his body. He went on with his life. All the prophecies that the Emperor of Heaven gave him were fulfilled. And one day he's walking down the street and he sees a man blocking his path. And this man is like, refuses to get out of his way. He's making eye contact with him and he's just like, he can't go around him. And Kinsey starts thinking, this guy looks kind of familiar. And so he says, where do I know you from? And this man says, okay, on this date, you died and you went to the other world and you met the Emperor of Heaven and you killed two bears and described the whole thing. The Emperor made these prophecies. And the man says, how do you know this? This is amazing. And the man says, I was that little boy who was standing next to the Emperor of Heaven. So it was this validation that, near-death experiences can occur because of the fact that this little boy just happened to be having an NDE at the same time as Kianci. They just happened to encounter each other, and then decades later, they just happened to meet on the street, and the little boy recognized him. And
Wow.
so in the text, this is like the Chinese scribes basically said, this happened on this day. It was witnessed by so and so, and it's like officially lodged in the Government Bureau of Documents as a factual event that occurred.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
And to think about how long ago that happened. I mean,
Yeah.
now you wonder, and this is the kind of stuff that goes through my head, Dr. Shushan. You wonder now if those two were eternally tied together in a soul family, and if they reincarnated together, and maybe
Mm.
traveled together from lifetime to lifetime, and if they tumble through time together.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, there are accounts from, I mentioned the children who remember past lives earlier. Some of them do say that they choose their next life. And they will even say, I saw the family I wanted to go to, and those are going to be my new parents. So who knows? That kind of thing, it's not really testable, but it's interesting that the accounts, more than one people from a different culture will comes up with the same idea.
Yeah, yeah, interesting stuff. Um, and then okay, so there's in one of the more fascinating, and not that the entire book isn't fascinating, but one of the more fascinating chapters is the Maya and Aztec Mesoamerica chapters. The history there and the experiences there are so rich. And there's one story in particular that riveted me, and that's one that I talked about a little bit earlier. And I'm wondering if you'll tell the story about two brothers who it has to do with their father going to the underworld, or having something to do with their father dies, I believe, and they believe their father. Again, I'm going to mess it up, so I'm going to have you tell it. But
Okay.
essentially, they're going to travel to the underworld to confront these gods
Yeah.
physically. They're going to go to the underworld to confront these
Yeah.
gods, and they believe that they're going to kill the gods. They're going to take them on,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'll let you tell it because it's riveting. It's just so to in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, this sounds like fairy tale stuff,
Mhm.
but it's interesting in how this is translated and then put together in modern lore.
Yeah. It's an interesting text. It's called the Popol Vuh, and it's kind of the Mayan the key Mayan mythological text that involves creation and the afterlife and lots of different elements of religious beliefs. And this particular episode, it's not just the two brothers, but there are two sets of two brothers. The first two are their fathers, and the second two are them. So first, their fathers, they're playing ball in a ball court because they had this, the Mayan had this the ball game where they would I can't remember what it was called, but they basically they can't use their hands and they have to kick the ball through these hoops, and it's absolutely impossible game to play. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so they're playing this ball game and they disturb the gods in the underworld, and so they're basically drawn down into the other underworld as punishment because they annoyed these deities. Um, and they go through this series of tests, which they fail every time. So one of them, for example, is they have to go in a dark room um, with a cigar, and then they have to come out of the dark room with the cigar intact. But when they're given the cigar, it's already lit. So the odds are stacked against them. And then the gods keep playing these ridiculous tricks on them. Like they say, "Oh, sit down on this bench," and they sit down and it's boiling hot and they have to jump up. So it's it's interesting because even though it's a meaningful religious text to the Maya to this day, it's filled with humor and it's filled with all these kind of story elements. So it's obviously intended to be partly symbolic, partly a story, but also it has deeper meanings behind it,
Yeah.
which is a pretty, common cross-cultural way of teaching people through story. So the first set of twins fail all these tests in the underworld, and they get beheaded, and then they get buried in the other world, and their body somehow, we're not told how, becomes one and grows into a melon tree. So fast forward later, their sons are who are named Hunapu and Zublanki. They're now playing ball on this ball court. They get drawn into the other world, and they kind of have this experience, this journey that replicates what their fathers did, except they have foreknowledge of what's going to happen. So they're able to outwit the gods. So, for example, when they're given the cigar, they put a firefly at the end of it to make it look like it's already lit. But then they're able to come out with the cigar intact. So they're not beheaded for that because they passed. And so this whole series of tests that they end up passing where their fathers failed. And then they finally outwit the gods of the underworld by saying they perform these miracles where they burn a house down and then they bring the house back. And then they destroy things and bring them back. And then the gods say, "Oh, we want you to do this with us. Kill me and bring me back to life." And so the twins say, "Sure, we'll do that." And they kill them and then don't bring them back to life after all. So they become the ones, they've gained the spiritual knowledge to defeat these gods in the afterlife, and facilitate their own journey to transformation and spirituality. So that's the meaning behind these kind of humorous stories. And then it ends with they're in the kind of lower depths of the underworld and they find the tree that used to be their father's. And there's a melon growing on this tree, and it spits at the god of the moon, somehow impregnating her. And this is all a kind of symbol of rebirth, their rebirth. And then the story ends with the twins. It literally says something like, "and they ascended to the light." So it's got this, spiritual transcendence moment at the end of it. Now, whether this whole account was based on shamanic experiences or a combination of shamanic experiences and NDEs and local folklore, um, it's again obvious that it's a teaching tool of folklore plus sort of high mythology plus spiritually transcendent afterlife guidebook stuff.
Yeah.
And like the other texts, a lot of it is kind of obscure to our understanding and our way of thinking.
Right. Right. It it's I mean it's like you said, it's myth and it's legend, but at the same time it teaches, but at the same time it's got and it's got humor. It entertains, but at the same time it shows you a little bit of a path as you're having interactions with the gods, that the gods can be tricksters, and it shows you if you're going into the underworld, or even if you choose to take that path, not
Mhm.
necessarily um what's the word I'm looking for here, Dr. Shushan? If you're willing to confront a god, if you're willing to be bigger than what you are, that there's a consequence to be bigger than what you are.
Right.
If you're willing to take on more than what you want to um, be careful, because the
Yeah.
consequence means that you're going to have to deal with, not only that you're going to have to deal with the consequence that what you're dealt, but it's going to change you internally as well. That's what I
Right.
get out of it. That
Yeah.
you're going to become something bigger than the sum of what you were.
Yeah.
Um,
And if you want to take that on, you better be prepared,
that's
basically.
that's right.
And even though there are all these sort of comical episodes, it's all about transcendence. So
Yes.
another fun example is there's a scene where they're playing ball with the gods in the ball court, and because they know they might be decapitated by the gods, they substitute for a pumpkin, and so they're kicking around this pumpkin, and that fools the gods into thinking that that's already one of their heads. So there's all these. It's really a kind of multi-layered text, and I often think of it as like if they're teaching this text to the population or even to children. I think about like, children nodding off to sleep and like they're going to be woken up when you start talking about playing ball with a decapitated head or when you start
Right.
talking about, the gods being outwitted or so there's things that are it's full of wonder and it's full of mysticism, all to kind of keep you engaged, I think, in order to learn the fundamentals of the story and learn the lessons that it's telling you, which is ultimately, rising to the light, which is, what the text says.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So all of these cultures obviously have the same thing in common with these near death experiences, even though the stories kind of vary from culture to culture. I believe in the book you cite that these they all have 9 points that are in common. Uh, do you remember what those 9 points are, or what they are that bring everything together?
I think so, yeah. I'll try. So leaving the body, encountering the corpse, seeing the body as it's lying there dead, traveling through darkness, emerging into light, going to another realm, meeting a being of light, meeting deceased relatives, some kind of evaluation or judgment, and transcendence and transformation and wisdom and knowledge and all that. I think that was nine.
Okay. So with that, now we've had these stories now from before the time of Christianity. We continue to have these experiences now. And as we begin to wrap up our program today, I would ask you this. We have these, we can call them either stories or historical accounts. I would throw it into your court and ask you this. When you come across these, do you consider these stories or historical accounts? And I would ask you this as a second part of the question. Why is it that science can or can't get behind this and say, you know what, this has been documented since the beginning of time, and we
Hmm.
continue to document this from individuals who are having these experiences. So why is it we don't put more money and more time and effort into this and figure out finally what type of experience we're having, or what is it that is happening at the
Hmm.
time of death?
Yeah, those are good questions. So the first one, I think, it's that's tricky too because I mean, is even a modern account of an NDE a historical document? Because all we really have is the subjective experience of the person describing it. Um, so the content isn't necessarily historical, but the fact that it exists, it's a historical document in some sense. Um, I mean, it's a problem because they're not validated, and that ties in with the science as well. Most scientists are going to say this is just anecdotal evidence, which, technically I guess it is, but when they're happening around the world and throughout history, those anecdotes add up to something, add up to the confirmation that these experiences actually occur. So, so the way I kind of frame it is if you have an account like the Epic of the Bilgamesh account or the ancient Chinese account with meeting the soul of the child in the other world, those I see as more like historical documents because they were seen by the people within their societies as historical documents.
Mhm.
Whereas something like the Rig Veda, that was seen by the people as a ritual text to facilitate journey to the other world. So I allow the cultures to make that distinction for me, basically, um, whether it's a historical text or not. But I do think that they must have been based on actual experiences because to me, there's no other way of explaining why these descriptions of NDEs occur if they're not based on experiences. I mean, the alternative is that, oh, well, they're all making up the same story, totally disconnected in different parts of the world in completely different eras. That's not an explanation. To me, that's much more difficult to accept than that, people are having NDEs and basing beliefs and telling stories about them. And as far as the science goes, yeah, your guess is as good as mine on that. Why there's not enough funding. I mean, it's still the case really that these experiences are kind of pathologized, and people who have them are often still afraid to talk about them. They don't want their doctors or nurses or their family members to laugh at them or think that they're crazy or whatever. So I think it's partly that. But from my perspective, um, it almost doesn't matter if they are genuine experiences of an afterlife, because for one thing, it's interesting enough to me, just as a historian of religions, that they've impacted religious beliefs and impacted culture all around the world. But on a more practical, contemporary level, the ways that they do transform people who come back to life, who come back from their NDE, that seems like it should be something that science should look into. But we live in a society where there's not even money to look at natural healing methods. Whether herbs and minerals and things like that are better, more efficacious, and safer than pharmaceuticals, because there's not enough money in that, where there's more money in pharmaceuticals. So unless somebody finds a way to make money um, out of transformations that happen in NDEs, I don't think we'll see much scientific research happening. I guess, to some degree, it's been happening with kind of modern shamanistic type things. People go to South America and have these kind of organized package tours with a shaman or supposed shaman, and they take ayahuasca and they have these kind of, some say NDE-like experiences that are supposed to result in transformations. I'm a little skeptical about some of that because I partly because of the marketing aspect, the mercenary sort of aspect of it already makes me a little skeptical. But also just the fact that drugs lead to positive transformation.
Mhm.
I'm not totally convinced that that's happened, because you can go on to any kind of psychedelics, discussion group online or whatever, and you will see that people are not transformed for the better through their drug use. So
Yeah.
it's a situational thing. There's no cure-all, basically.
I, you didn't see the recent 60 Minutes deal with veterans who were using MDMA with
I didn't know.
PTSD?
I
No?
didn't.
Okay. Okay. I would encourage you to watch that
Okay.
and then see if it doesn't change your mind a little bit.
Yeah, no, I totally accept that it helps with PTSD and certain psychological issues. And I know there's been like great effects with microdosing and things like that. But I don't think that some, I don't know, completely amoral, racist, greedy, horrible person is going to take ayahuasca and come back and
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that all people are equal
I'm
and
not
everything's about love and light. So
I'm not talking about going out into the jungle and doing
yeah, yeah,
ayahuasca for 4 days and then coming back and thinking
yeah,
you're healed. I'm not talking about anything
right.
like that. I'm talking about a measured program with veterans.
Yeah,
Yeah, talking about a scientific program
right.
where they were treated with MDMA.
Yeah. Oh no, I totally believe that that works. And
And
I
yeah,
know there's other with other psychedelics too. There's been success in
yeah,
treating things like that.
yeah,
But as far as comparing, and which a lot of people do, comparing psychedelic drug use to NDEs in hopes of bringing about those kinds of transformations, I'm just not totally convinced that it's such an easy path to get there.
right, right, right.
Which is
Um,
not also saying that people should be deliberately having NDEs either. It's just, I
right.
think
No, no, no.
it's a hard road that we all have to kind of
Well,
get their own way.
really, you shouldn't. We shouldn't be flirting with that veil, right? I mean, we shouldn't
Yeah,
be trying to step over because if you go one toke over the line, sweet Jesus, I mean, you may not come back, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's the idea.
yeah.
So let me ask you this question here, Dr. Shushan. Before we wrap things up here, is it the culture that influences the NDE or the NDE that influences the culture? Is it the life I'm living that influences what I see as I'm crossing over to the great beyond? Is it, am I truly making my own afterlife? Is that what's happening here?
I think it's both. I think it's the way I've kind of tended to look at it is that there's a kind of cross-cultural objective NDE type of experience, which is basically those nine elements we talked about earlier.
Mhm.
But then our cultural symbolism, the way our minds think, our individual experiences and everything else kind of clothe those things in our own symbolic ways. We kind of project our psyche onto those as ways of experiencing them, basically. I think there may be maybe they're unexperienceable in their raw form, so we have to kind of clothe them, we project onto them our symbols in order to experience them. So I think it's a symbiotic kind of thing that and then as far as the way they influence our beliefs, I think that's the symbiotic thing where our our beliefs influence the experience, our symbols and our culture influence the experience influences our symbols and culture, and so it goes on in this kind of cyclical sort of way.
Interesting. Interesting indeed. Well, Dr. Shushan, you put together an incredibly interesting book. And
Thank
I
you.
encourage people to go out and get it. Again, we have a link in the description of this program. Name of the book is Near-Death Experiences in Ancient Civilizations, The Origins of the World's Afterlife Beliefs. We have a link in the description of this program, folks. Dr. Gregory Shushan has been our guest today. Dr. Shushan, thank you so much for being on the program today.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's been a
Oh,
pleasure.
folks, I want to just a couple of notes here before we wrap up today. I want to thank, first of all, Troy Palmer, who's the executive producer, rather, of the program today. Thank you, Troy, for everything you do, first and foremost. Second, I had mentioned it was kind of a rough week this week. I want to ask everybody to send some thoughts and prayers out to my brother Drew, who lost his mother, my stepmom, this week. Jean passed away, actually, this past week. So if you can send some thoughts and prayers out to my brother Drew this week, I appreciate it. I'll be out at Missouri Paracon this weekend, so that you can still get day passes if you want, if you can. MissouriParacon.com, I believe it is. We'll have a link in the description of this program. So if you want to come out, get your day passes, you can still do so. I believe you can also still get a weekend pass or two. It's coming close to being sold out, folks. So but you can still get a day pass to Missouri Paracon. So come on out if you're in the Kansas City area this weekend. Come out, say hi. I have my own table, so come on out, say hi at Missouri Paracon. Also, if you do not subscribe to Darkness Radio, to the audio podcast in any particular place, get the Darkness Radio Apple app. If you have an iPhone, iPad, or any Apple device, you can get the Darkness Radio app in the Apple Store. So go get the Apple app there. And if you're watching this show on video on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. You can do that very easily. The original Darkness Radio is our YouTube page. If you're not watching us on video regularly, just go to the original Darkness Radio. That's our YouTube page. Be sure to like and subscribe there. We appreciate it if you do. All right, that'll do it for this weekend, folks. It's nice outside. It's been nice all week, especially here in the north. But that doesn't mean that there aren't people out there that need your help. There are people out there that probably need some help with some spring cleanup. And I know it's not spring yet, but we're on the verge of spring. People need your help out there. They need help with some grocery shopping. They need help. There's people out there that are elderly or infirm. Go out and help your neighbors this weekend. Be a light in someone's darkness, please. Your friends here at Darkness Radio encourage you to go out and help in the community. Again, be a light in someone's darkness. Go out and help somebody this weekend. A message from your friends here at Darkness Radio. Go out and have a great weekend. Join us again next week for the best in paranormal podcasting. This is Darkness Radio.
For more audio and video archives of the show, intriguing content, and cool swag, check out darknessradioshow.com. The executive producer of Darkness Radio is Troy Palmer. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed today's show, be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to have a great weekend and remember to go out and be a light in someone's darkness.